Welcome to my channel and to The Great Awakening, a Libertarian Interpretation. Before we begin, a quick note. If you are interested in this topic, then you'll want to check out Dr. Polleits Boom and Bust Report. All information can be found at www.boombustreport.com. And now let's begin with The Great Awakening. Admittedly, it is not easy to recognize a turning point in history when it is unfolding right before your eyes, when you are a contemporary witness of events. It is much easier to label affairs as turning points in hindsight. And that is why what is happening around the world right now, I call it the Great Awakening or the New Enlightenment, is likely difficult for many of us to fully grasp and comprehend in its consequences. What's going on right now? In Argentina, Javier Milei is elected president in December 2023. As a self-declared libertarian, he promises to restore freedom and prosperity to a country that has been ruined by decades of socialism and corruption, and so he's about liberating the markets and drastically reducing the state. In the US, Donald J. Trump is elected the 47th president in November 2024. His promises to bring about economic recovery, dismantle the chaos caused by the globalists with their Great Reset agenda, shrink the deep state, and fight its corruption and crimes. In Europe, there are also, here and there, albeit more hesitantly, similar political approaches that aim to break with the old ways. Think of the Netherlands, Austria, and several Eastern European countries. What is the core of all this? It is not, as it is often claimed, about left or right, with right-wing or right populist forces attempting to take control. Rather, it is about the following fundamental decision. Should freedom and voluntarism determine how people live together, or should coercion and violence dictate how we interact? Let us remember, there are only two ways in which we humans can cooperate with each other. Freedom with its voluntary action on one side, and coercion and violence, including deception, on the other. Voluntary action means I offer you an apple for $1 and you buy it or reject my offer entirely as you wish. Coercion and violence mean I force you to buy the apple I offer, and if you refuse I will punish you. So voluntary action on the one side and coercion and violence on the other. There is no third way, tertium non datur, as the saying goes in Latin. Against this backdrop, we can easily understand what libertarian means, what libertarianism is. Libertarianism is the consistent, logically reasoned idea of individual freedom. It is characterized by the so-called non-aggression principle. Practically speaking, libertarianism says, no one may initiate unwanted aggression or violence against other people or their property. Aggression here means the use or threat of physical violence against peaceful people and their property, or the use of deception to gain access to their labor or property. How does this philosophy fit with the state? Let us first ask, what is the state as we know it today? In short, the state is the territorial coercive monopolist with the ultimate authority over all conflicts in its territory. It also claims the right to do something that is forbidden to everyone else, collect taxes, that is, take money from people without providing a specific service in return, which is actually the definition of stealing or thievery, isn't it? Now, if you think about it more deeply, you'll see that the state, as we know it today, does not stand for freedom and voluntary action, but for coercion and violence. If you don't believe this, try refusing to pay taxes because you say don't wish to demand state services, and see what happens. And you'll quickly learn about the state's coercive and violent practices. Furthermore, it becomes clear such a state was not formed through voluntary agreement. Neither you nor I signed a contract, nor did our ancestors. In short, the state, as we know it today, was eventually imposed on people by others. Now you may say, okay, that may all be true, but we need the state. Who else will build the roads, pay for schools, or ensure law and order? A reasonable thought, a legitimate question. Indeed, people do desire goods like roads, schools, and law and order, and no doubt especially the latter are essential for our peaceful coexistence. However, this doesn't mean that these goods can only be provided by the state, let alone that they should be. That would be like watching a monkey ride a bike and concluding that only monkeys can ride bikes. It would be a logical fallacy, a non sequitur. Logical errors are a red flag for libertarian thinkers. And so at this point, the problem libertarians have with the state comes to the fore. The state, as we know it today, is based not on voluntary action, but on coercion and violence. But libertarians reject coercion and violence as principles for human interaction on ethical grounds. For them, there's simply no convincing argument as to why anyone should or may rule over others, why anyone should force you to do something you do not want to do voluntarily. Libertarians do not reject law and order or the well-being of all. Rather, they reject the monopolization of law and order and many other goods by the state through force. By the way, this is not an arbitrary conclusion of libertarianism, but has a well-founded logical justification, which I will not elaborate on here. Libertarianism concludes that all goods that people desire can and should be provided in the free market, without any involvement of the state, without a state as we know it today. But is this realistic, practical? This is indeed a question that comes to mind when considering the Great Awakening unfolding before our eyes. It seems to me that more and more people want an end to the obvious failures, economic decline, inflation, social and cultural conflicts, etc. So far, the process has been vote out the old government, vote in a new one, and hope for better results. But exactly that approach has not worked in recent decades. Above all, the state as we know it today has only grown larger and more overbearing. And it is now obviously the root cause of the many widespread problems. In Argentina, people have drawn the conclusion that libertarian recommends. Milei says he advocates for a policy of rolling back the state and creating a system of free markets. If it turns out to be true, he would not be a politician, but an anti-politician. In the US, libertarian ideas are less clearly expressed, but there are signs, especially in the Trump administration's goal to unseat the deep state and break from the Great Reset agenda. With a delay, these impulses will likely be felt in Europe if they have an impact in the US. Or is it all just a big theater, another staged performance, a deception by those in power, with another inevitable disappointment to follow? I believe the answer to this question largely depends on whether freedom of speech is preserved, whether lost ground can be regained. For freedom of speech, albeit simplistically put, is the key to enlightenment, to the Great Awakening. The German poet Johann Wolfgang von Goethe knew this when he wrote, "Through the mouth of two witnesses truth is made known." And even before Goethe, the philosopher of Enlightenment, Immanuel Kant from Königsberg, expressed this in 1784. What is required for this enlightenment is nothing more than freedom, and, indeed, the least harmful form of freedom, namely the freedom to make public use of one's reason in all matters. If freedom of speech is restored and maintained, then the chances are very high that through public discourse reason will overcome unreason, truth will displace falsehood. And then profound societal changes in the Western world will most likely take place. Changes that will probably exceed what most of us can imagine today, because many people today do not fully comprehend the scale of unreason and falsehood that has been brought upon them by the lack of free speech and, caused by it, widespread ignorance. Things that many today still regard as good and necessary, even indispensable, will be unmasked as unacceptable, unnecessary, and some even as harmful. I'm thinking, for instance, of the state, especially the large state structures and their bureaucratic apparatus. State fiat money, inflation, wars between states, state-dependent institutions such as schools, universities, even science and churches, taxes as compulsory contributions, the EU and the UN. Enlightenment, the Great Awakening, will put all this to the test. This is also the reason why those in power right now are so keen on controlling, limiting freedom of speech, as Kant envisioned it, on trying to restrict or effectively eliminate free speech, that is, freedom to make public use of one's reason in all matters, as Kant put it. However, one should be aware of the fact that either there is freedom of speech or there isn't. Even a little restriction on free speech means that freedom of speech no longer exists, and then thinking is no longer free, and people's freedom is lost. But if freedom of speech returns and is preserved, the expectation of a great awakening is well founded. And if that happens, significant transformations, indeed upheavals, will be heading towards the Western world. These will be upheavals that will touch everyone in how they relate to themselves and their world, obligating us, in short, to Kant's maxim of action. Act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of another, always at the same time as an end, never merely as a means. In this sense, a great awakening effectively amounts to a new enlightenment, the enlightenment of the 21st century. A great awakening would be nothing less than the way towards the libertarian ideal of individual freedom, a free society. Having said that, let us conclude with the words of the German poet Friedrich von Schiller. The human being is created free, is free, and if he were born in chains, do not be misled by the cries of the mob, not by the abuse of raging fools. Before the slave, when he breaks the chain, before the free man, do not tremble. Thank you very much for your attention. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like it and share it. And please visit my website, Dr. Polleits Boom and Bust Report, www.boombustreport.com.